Welcome, today's story is full of drama. Like and subscribe to stay updated. Let's get started.
Life has a strange way of unfolding, doesn't it? Here I am, Ethan Clark, a 44-year-old man who once thought he had life all figured out. Married for 21 years to Susan, my rock, my best friend, the woman who's been with me through thick and thin. Together, we raised our daughter, Sarah, now 18. A bright young woman ready to embark on a new chapter of her life. She's dating Ryan, a decent young man, and they're already talking about marriage. I have mixed feelings about that, proud, but also a bit reluctant to let my little girl go. I'm a partner in Clark & Fields Accounting, a firm I co-founded with my college buddy, Jason Fields. Jason is a character, to say the least. Back in college, he was the life of the party, the guy everyone wanted to be around. He hasn't changed much. Still unmarried, still a womanizer. Sometimes I wonder how he keeps up with it all, juggling his extracurricular activities while helping run a firm worth millions. I guess that's Jason for you, charming, brilliant, and maddeningly irresponsible at times. We built this firm from the ground up, starting in a cramped office on Willow Street with a couple of desks and big dreams. Those days were tough but exhilarating. We'd work long hours fueled by cheap coffee and youthful ambition, believing anything was possible. And now, here we are, managing a business that serves high-profile clients and brings in millions annually. It's surreal, really, but success comes with its own challenges. Jason and I often clash, not about the work itself because we're both good at what we do, but about his lifestyle. I worry that one day his antics could tarnish the reputation we've worked so hard to build. I've tried talking to him about it, but he brushes it off, laughing, saying, "Relax, Ethan. Life's too short to stress about what people think." Maybe he's right, but I can't help feeling responsible for more than just the bottom line. At home, things are quieter now. Susan and I have more time to ourselves since Sarah moved out for college, though she visits often. It's strange, the shift from being hands-on parents to just being us again. Susan's my anchor, the one who keeps me grounded when work gets overwhelming. She's also the one who reminds me that Sarah is not a little girl anymore, that she has to make her own decisions, including her choice to marry Ryan. It started as a joke, just an offhand comment during a meeting with one of our clients, Peter Harmon. Peter is a brilliant guy, though a bit of an oddball, the kind of person you'd expect to see in some sci-fi movie hacking into a government database. He works on classified tech for the military and secret services, designing software that can break into systems most of us can't even comprehend. That day, Peter was explaining his latest creation, a program capable of hacking into a phone, copying its data, and even tapping into real-time calls. It was both fascinating and terrifying. I remember leaning back in my chair, half joking as I said, "Well, if it's that good, why don't you hack into my wife's phone? Let's see what Susan's talking about." Peter looked at me for a second, smirked and said, "All right, let's do it." I laughed nervously, but before I could object or clarify that I wasn't serious, he was already at work. He asked for Susan's phone number, and still thinking it was all just a harmless prank, I gave it to him. Within minutes, he had her phone hacked. "Here," he said, handing me a pair of headphones. "She's on a call right now." I froze for a moment. This was real. The rational part of me screamed to stop this nonsense, but curiosity won. I put on the headphones, my heart pounding in my chest, and listened. At first, the conversation seemed innocent. Susan was talking to Jason, my business partner and supposed friend. She mentioned Sarah's upcoming wedding, saying it was scheduled for the 15th of next month. I felt a flicker of pride. It's not every day your daughter gets married. But then her tone shifted, and her next words hit me like a freight train. "Jason, you know she's your daughter," she said. My breath caught in my throat. Did I hear that right? I strained to listen as they both laughed, the sound twisting like a knife in my chest. "Well," Jason said, his voice dripping with mockery, "guess I got the best of both worlds. Made you mine and got that idiot to foot the bill for 18 years. The casual cruelty in his words made my stomach churn. My mind raced, trying to piece it together. Sarah, my Sarah, wasn't mine? Jason, the man I trusted, had been with Susan behind my back? And worse, they'd been laughing about it, mocking me, turning my life into some sick joke. "Once Ethan pays for the wedding," Susan continued, her tone as cold as ice, "I'll file for divorce. Oh, and Sarah wants you to give her away. After all, you're her real father." Couldn't breathe. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the rest of their conversation. Divorce? She'd been planning this all along. using me as a means to an end, a wallet to fund her perfect little fantasy. And Sarah? She knew? Had she been in on this? The thought made my hands shake. I couldn't believe the betrayal, the lies, the manipulation, the utter disregard for everything we'd built together. I pulled off the headphones and sat in stunned silence, the weight of what I just heard pressing down on me like a lead blanket. My mind replayed the moments of our life together, searching for signs I might have missed. The late nights, the excuses, the subtle changes in behavior. It was all so clear now, and yet I'd been blind to it for years. Jason, my friend, my partner, the man who helped me build a life and a business, had been the one to destroy it all. And Susan, she wasn't the woman I thought I married. She was a stranger now, someone capable of such cold-hearted betrayal. I felt a mix of emotions. Rage, sadness, humiliation, and above all, heartbreak. My life, my family, my daughter. None of it was what I thought it was. And now I had to decide what to do next. But one thing was certain: this betrayal wouldn't go unanswered. The shock was still settling, but I didn't have the luxury of breaking down. Not yet. The betrayal was too fresh, the pain too raw, but above all that, a cold, calculated rage began to take shape. This wasn't the time for tears or grief. This was the time for action. Peter sat across from me, his eyes fixed on mine as if he understood exactly what I was feeling. He didn't ask questions, didn't press for details. Maybe it was because he'd been through something similar. His own divorce had left scars I could see in his demeanor, or maybe he just knew when a man needed to act instead of talk. "I'll help you," he said, his voice steady, carrying the weight of unspoken understanding. "You tell me what you need, Ethan, and I'll get it done." I didn't hesitate. "I need their phones tapped, Jason's, Susan's, and Sarah's. I want every call recorded, every text intercepted. If they're hiding something, I want to know all of it." Peter nodded without blinking, already mentally mapping out what needed to be done. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming against the table. "Give me some time. I'll set it up, and as soon as I have something, I'll come to you." The weight of his promise settled in the room. It wasn't the kind of assurance you get from a casual friend or a business associate. This was different. Peter wasn't just helping me out of obligation. He understood the fire burning inside me. I clenched my fists, staring at the floor, replaying the sickening conversation I'd overheard. Every word Susan and Jason had exchanged was etched into my mind, their laughter ringing in my ears like a cruel taunt. Sarah's involvement cut the deepest. Had she really chosen Jason, knowing the truth? Or was she just another pawn in their twisted game? I couldn't allow myself to think too far ahead. This wasn't about hurt feelings anymore. It was about uncovering the full scope of their betrayal and figuring out how to dismantle the lies they'd built their lives around. "Thank you," I said quietly, my voice tight. It was all I could manage, but Peter didn't need more. He stood and placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "We'll get to the bottom of this. Just hold on." As he left, I sat there alone in the quiet office, my mind churning. I'd spent my life building something real. My family, my business, my relationships, and now I was watching it all unravel. But if they thought I'd sit back and let it happen, they were sorely mistaken. They made their moves. Now it was my turn, and I wasn't just going to play, I was going to win. The drive home felt like a blur, my mind a tangled mess replaying the conversation I overheard, thinking of all the years I'd been lied to. But I knew I couldn't let Susan sense anything. Not yet. If she suspected I knew, it could ruin everything. When I walked through the door, Susan greeted me with her usual smile. Felt hollow now, a mask I couldn't unsee. She leaned in to kiss me, and I instinctively turned my head. "Sorry, I think I'm coming down with something," I mumbled, avoiding her gaze. "Oh," she said, pulling back slightly, her smile faltering. "You should rest then." I nodded, excusing myself to my study. That room had always been my sanctuary, the one place where I could think clearly. Tonight, it became my war room. Sitting at my desk, I opened my laptop. The soft glow of the screen lit up the dark room, and I started working. The first thing I did was draft a few documents, ones I'd been too naive to ever consider before: separation agreements, prenuptial reviews, and detailed asset lists. I sent everything to our company lawyer, marking it urgent. He didn't need the full story yet, just that I needed these preparations in place. Next, I turned my attention to the wedding. Sarah's wedding, the one I'd been led to believe was my responsibility, my privilege as her father. I pulled up all the records, invoices, receipts, venue bookings, catering, dress fittings. It was all there. A staggering amount of money already spent and more payments looming. Then came the harder part. I sat back and started calculating everything I'd invested in Sarah over the past 18 years. Her education, her medical bills, her birthdays, her vacations. All the things I'd gladly given, thinking she was my daughter. The total was staggering. But it wasn't just the money. It was the time, the love, the sleepless nights when she was sick, the pride I felt watching her grow up, and Susan. I gritted my teeth as I calculated how much I'd spent on her over the years. On her comforts, her dreams, her every whim. I'd spared no expense, thinking I was doing right by my wife. But now every cent felt like a mockery, a reminder of the betrayal I'd unknowingly funded. By the time I was done, the numbers stared back at me, cold and unfeeling. The sum of a life built on lies. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The rage simmered beneath the surface, raw and unrelenting. But so did something else. A deep, hollow sadness. This was my life, my family, and it had all been an illusion. I didn't go back to the bedroom that night. I couldn't bear to lie next to Susan, knowing what I now knew. Instead, I stayed in my study, my thoughts racing as I planned my next moves. If they thought they could play me, they had no idea what was coming. The game had changed, and this time I wasn't playing to lose. Sitting across from Peter 2 days later, I felt a strange mix of anticipation and dread. This was it, the moment I would hear for myself the truth of what these people really thought of me. I wasn't sure if I was ready, but then again, no one's ever truly ready for betrayal. Peter leaned forward, placing a small recorder on the table between us. He gave me a look, part reassurance, part warning, before pressing play. The first call crackled to life, and my heart sank immediately as Sarah's voice filled the room. "Jason," she said, her tone bright, almost cheerful. "I've been thinking. I want you to walk me down the aisle. You're my real dad, after all. Ethan's just lame. I mean, he's been such an idiot my whole life. I don't even know how he hasn't figured it out." The air was sucked out of the room. Hearing her call me lame, an idiot, after everything I'd done for her, was like a dagger to my heart. But it was the way she called Jason dad that hurt the most. The title I'd carried with pride for 18 years, stripped away in an instant. Peter paused the recording for a moment, giving me a chance to catch my breath. I didn't say anything, just nodded for him to continue. The next call was between Susan and Jason. My stomach churned as soon as I heard Susan's voice. Soft, sultry. Nothing like the way she spoke to me anymore. "You know, I can't stop thinking about last time," she purred. "Are we still on for tomorrow? Same hotel?" Jason chuckled, his voice dripping with smugness. "Of course. Can't have Ethan finding out, though. Not that he ever would. The guy's so stupid it's almost too easy. Hell, I keep him around because he's making me a fortune. Let the idiot do all the work while we enjoy the benefits." I clenched my fists so tightly my knuckles turned white. The sheer audacity of it, the disdain in his voice, the way he dismissed me like I was nothing. And Susan, she laughed. She laughed with him, like it was all some kind of twisted joke. When the recording ended, the room fell silent. Peter didn't say anything. What could he say? The betrayal was laid out in brutal detail, every word another stab in the back. I sat there, staring at the recorder, the weight of it all pressing down on me. Sarah, the daughter I'd raised with love and pride, saw me as a joke. Susan, my wife of 21 years, had not only cheated but conspired against me with my best friend. And Jason, the man I trusted like a brother, had built his success on my hard work while treating me like a fool. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The pain was there, raw and unrelenting, but beneath it was something stronger, determination. They thought they'd won. They thought I was blind, weak, a pawn to be played. But they were wrong. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next few days were a blur of calculated actions and cold precision. Every move I made was deliberate, every decision perfectly timed. The company had always been our pride and joy, or so I thought. In reality, it was just another tool for Jason to indulge his vices while I did the heavy lifting. That was about to change. Using my full access to the firm's accounts, I began orchestrating a transfer $80 million, funneled through a labyrinth of accounts. Each step was meticulously planned to obscure its trail. By the time it landed in its final destination, a secure account in Switzerland, There was no way to trace it back to me. With the finances handled, I turned my attention to the wedding. Sarah had no idea the expenses were no longer coming from me. I shifted every payment, caterers, florists, venue costs, to the company's credit cards. They wanted me to pay for their betrayal? Fine, I'd pay for it, but on their dime. That night, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat in the quiet of my study, letting the weight of my actions sink in. The plan was unfolding perfectly. Every move, every detail had been carefully calculated. By the time Susan walked through the door that evening, everything was set in motion. She stumbled in, her cheeks flushed from too much wine, or perhaps from her time with Jason. The sight of her, still reeking of betrayal, made my stomach churn, but I forced myself to remain calm. There was no room for anger, no space for emotion. Not yet. "Hey, Ethan," she said, her voice slightly slurred. She tried to lean in for a kiss, but I sidestepped her, fighting a smile. "Busy day?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She laughed, a sound that grated on my nerves now. "You know how it is," she said, brushing off the question. I didn't press her. Instead, I handed her a folder containing the document I had prepared earlier. "Susan, I've been thinking," I began, my voice calm, even warm. "With everything going on, the wedding, the company, it's all becoming too much for me. I feel like I'm stretched too thin. So I've decided to simplify things." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but the alcohol had dulled her usual sharpness. "Simplify?" she asked. "Yes," I said, sliding the document across the table. "I'm transferring my share of the company to you. It's only fair, considering how much you've supported me over the years. This way, you'll have full control and I can step back from all the stress." She blinked at me, clearly surprised. "You're giving me your share?" "I trust you, Susan," I said, lying through my teeth. "You've always been my partner in business and in life. This just makes it official." She hesitated for a moment, looking down at the papers. Then, as if some small part of her was still trying to process what was happening, she asked, "What's the catch?" "No catch," I replied smoothly. "Just sign here and it's done. You'll have full control and I'll be out of the way, no more worrying about work for me. I'll focus on things that matter, like family." Her face softened at the mention of family, but I saw the greed flash in her eyes. She wanted this, needed it. The idea of being in control of a multi-million-dollar company, of having the upper hand, was too tempting for her to resist. She picked up the pen, her hand slightly unsteady, and scrawled her signature across the dotted line. "Done," she said with a satisfied smile. I took the folder back, careful to keep my expression neutral. Inside, I was seething with triumph. She had no idea what she just signed. No idea that the company was now riddled with debt she couldn't possibly escape. She thought she was getting the keys to the kingdom, but all she'd inherited was a sinking ship. "Thank you, Susan," I said, forcing a smile. "This means a lot to me." She waved me off, clearly too drunk to think any further about it. "Don't mention it. You've earned a break." I nodded, watching her as she stumbled toward the bedroom. Once she was out of sight, I exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment settling over me. This was just the beginning. The company's finances were already in chaos, and now, on paper, it was all hers. The loans, the embezzled money, the debts, she and Jason would be the ones to answer for it. The next day dawned with an eerie calm, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. I went about my morning routine as if nothing was out of the ordinary, but inside, I was anything but calm. My plan was advancing swiftly, and today was pivotal. Susan and Jason had their usual rendezvous planned at a cheap hotel that had become their haven for deceit. This time, though, it was my stage and they were the unwitting performers. Peter had ensured the room was set up perfectly, every angle covered, each camera discreetly placed to capture their sordid spectacle in crystal-clear high definition. Nothing was left to chance. When they arrived, giggling like teenagers, the cameras rolled, recording every act of their betrayal. They put on quite the performance, better than I expected. Watching the footage later would be a necessary evil, but for now it was enough to know it existed. By the time they left, sweaty and smug, they had no idea their little escapade had been immortalized. That evening, Sarah was out with her friends. Little did she know, the groundwork had already been laid to expose her true nature. Peter had hired someone for the job, a man named Dominic, whose charm was as lethal as a blade. His task was simple: strip away the illusion Sarah had so carefully crafted. Within minutes of meeting her, Dominic had Sarah hooked, flattered, intoxicated by his attention, and ready to follow him anywhere. By the time he led her to his room, she was practically begging for him. Hidden cameras captured everything, the way she threw herself at him, the way she abandoned any pretense of loyalty or dignity. The footage was damning, more so than I had anticipated. This wasn't an innocent mistake or a moment of weakness. It was a complete betrayal. As I sat in my study that evening, knowing both Susan and Sarah had been exposed for who they truly were, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, yes, but also satisfaction. They had underestimated me, all of them. They thought they could play me for a fool, that I would roll over and accept their lies. But now, the evidence was mounting, the noose tightening around their necks. The day of reckoning was approaching, and when it came, there would be no escape. 2 days later, I met Butch at a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town. The place had an old-world charm, the kind of spot where people came to drink away their problems or seal deals best left in the shadows. Butch was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth nursing a glass of whiskey. He was a towering man with a thick Irish accent, his reputation preceding him as both a mobster and one of my more colorful clients. He gave me a knowing look as I slid into the booth across from him. "Ethan," he said, his voice low but steady. "Don't usually see you in places like this. What's on your mind, mate?" I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I laid it all out, the betrayal, the lies, the recordings. Butch listened intently, his expression growing darker with each word. By the time I finished, he leaned back and took a long sip of his whiskey. "Susan, Jason, and even your girl Sarah," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "That's a hell of a knife they've stuck in your back. You want me to take care of it?" I knew what he meant. Butch wasn't one for subtlety, and his solutions were often permanent. "No," I said firmly, meeting his gaze. "Killing Jason would be too kind. I want him to suffer. I want him to lose everything, his reputation, his money, his freedom. I want him to feel the weight of every lie he's ever told." Butch nodded slowly, a grin forming on his face. "A man after my own heart. You're not looking for justice, you're looking for vengeance. Fair enough. What's your plan?" I leaned in closer, lowering my voice as I outlined my ideas. Jason had always been careless, relying on me to keep his financials clean while he indulged in his vices. He thought his charm and connections made him untouchable, but I knew where the skeletons were buried, and I planned to dig them up. I explained how I intended to expose Jason's shady dealings to our clients and the authorities. It wouldn't just ruin his career, it would destroy the firm we built together. He'd lose his wealth, his status, and any shred of credibility he had left. Susan wasn't off the hook either. I planned to use the evidence I gathered to counter any divorce claims she might make. She wouldn't get a dime of what she thought she was entitled to. And as for Sarah, well, I had something special planned for her too. Butch listened, nodding occasionally, his grin never fading. When I finished, he leaned forward, resting his massive arms on the table. "You've got a solid plan, Ethan," he said, "but you're going to need help. People like Jason and Susan don't go down without a fight. If you want this done right, you'll need more than just paperwork and recordings. You'll need leverage." "Leverage?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "The kind that makes people squirm," he said, his grin turning almost wicked. "I've got some friends who specialize in finding the kind of dirt that doesn't just ruin reputations, it burns lives to the ground. You give me the word, and I'll put them on it." I hesitated for a moment, weighing my options. This was a line I'd never crossed before, but then again, I'd never been in this position. "Do it," I said finally, "but make sure it's clean. I don't want anything coming back to me later." Butch raised his glass in a toast. "To vengeance, the slow kind." We clinked glasses, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control returning. This wasn't just about getting even. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and everything they tried to take from me. The wedding was just a few days away, and everything was falling into place exactly as I'd planned. The bill for the wedding had already reached an absurd $1.8 million. As I looked over the numbers once again, I couldn't help but smile. Every penny was well spent. The whole thing was a spectacle, a show of opulence and excess, all funded by me. But as I watched the wedding plans unfold, I knew the real show was yet to come. Susan and Sarah were busy with last-minute preparations, completely unaware of what was about to happen. They were too caught up in their plans to see the walls closing in around them. Once they were gone, I made my final move. The packers arrived that afternoon. They worked quickly, efficiently, moving everything out of the house. Every piece of clothing, every trinket, every photo. Packed away like they were nothing but remnants of a life I no longer wanted. By the time the trucks rolled out, the house was empty, a hollow shell of what it once was. But the boxes weren't headed for storage. They were on their way to Jason's house. By the time Susan and Sarah arrived at the wedding venue, they were completely absorbed in the fantasy they had crafted. Sarah, the glowing bride-to-be, was the center of attention. Her dress, makeup, and every detail had been meticulously planned to ensure she looked perfect. Susan was equally engrossed, her focus split between managing the event and basking in the idea of her new life with Jason. Neither of them gave a second thought to my absence. They assumed I would show up later, as I always did, reliable to a fault. Jason, meanwhile, was already at the venue, overseeing the final touches with his usual arrogance. He wandered from table to table, tasting the food, inspecting the arrangements, ensuring everything was in order. He was completely unaware of what I had set in motion. As the guests filled the hall, the mood was lively, filled with the kind of energy only weddings bring. The music played softly in the background, and everyone awaited the bride's grand entrance. But as the ceremony began, there was one glaring omission: me. My absence hadn't gone unnoticed, and quiet whispers rippled through the crowd. Sarah and Susan brushed off questions, offering vague excuses about last-minute business keeping me away. As Sarah prepared to walk down the aisle, Jason stood ready to escort her, his face smug as he relished the moment. But then, as the music swelled, the large screen above the altar flickered to life. At first, it was static, but within seconds, an image appeared: Jason and Susan in their hotel room, caught in the act. The video played in crystal-clear detail, every sordid moment displayed for all to see. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Faces turned pale, and heads swiveled towards Susan and Jason, who stood frozen in place, their expressions shifting from confusion to horror. Sarah, who had just entered the room, stood paralyzed, her eyes locked on the screen. She barely had time to process what was happening before the footage changed. Now, the video showed Sarah herself, in a hotel room with Dominic, the man Peter had hired. The footage was just as explicit, capturing her betrayal in vivid detail. Gasps turned to cries of disbelief as the guests, many of whom were family, began to realize the depth of the deception surrounding them. Like mother, like daughter. A distorted voice boomed over the sound system, the words dripping with venom. The truth always comes out. The atmosphere was suffocating. Susan's face turned ashen, her hands trembling as she tried to steady herself. Jason stood motionless, his expression a mixture of rage and humiliation. Sarah broke into sobs, covering her face as the room spun out of control. At the front of the room, Mike, Sarah's fiancé, stood in stunned silence. He turned to her, his face red with fury. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the hall. "This is who you are?" Before Sarah could respond, Mike's mother stormed up to her, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. Without hesitation, she slapped Sarah across the face. The crack echoed in the room as Sarah stumbled back, clutching her cheek. "You've disgraced yourself and your family," she screamed. "This wedding is over." Mike wasted no time. He walked out of the church without looking back, his mother following close behind. The guests began to murmur louder, some heading for the exits, others staying, too shocked to move. Susan and Sarah were left standing at the altar, humiliated and alone. Jason, for all his bravado, slinked into the shadows, avoiding the glares and whispers of the guests. Back at the now empty house, movers had just finished unloading Susan and Sarah's belongings into Jason's home. The irony wasn't lost on me. The two of them would now have to face their new reality, living under the same roof, bound by their shared betrayal. But this was only the beginning of their downfall. A few hours later, I received a call from Butch. "Ethan, it's done," he said, his voice calm. "The footage is everywhere. It's going viral as we speak. Jason's reputation is in tatters, and the firm is under investigation for financial misconduct. The debts are piling up, and Susan and Sarah are already feeling the heat." I smiled, the weight of years of betrayal lifting off my shoulders. "Good," I said simply. "Let them drown in it." Butch chuckled. "You've outdone yourself, mate. What's next for you?" "Freedom," I replied, my voice steady. I've done what I needed to do. Now it's time to move on. Later that evening, as the chaos unfolded, I boarded a plane with my new identity and a secure account holding over $80 million. The world I left behind was crumbling, but I felt no guilt, no remorse. Susan, Sarah, and Jason had played their game and they lost. The flight was smooth, and as the plane touched down in the Maldives, I took a deep breath, savoring the fresh air and the promise of a new beginning. For the first time in decades, I felt truly alive, free. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Maldives skies in hues of orange and purple, I walked along the pristine beach. The soft sand beneath my feet felt grounding, a stark contrast to the whirlwind of betrayal and revenge that had consumed my life for months. The serenity of the moment was almost surreal. For the first time in years, my mind was quiet. Back home, chaos reigned. Jason was facing a storm of lawsuits from clients and creditors as the financial misconduct I had orchestrated unraveled. The multi-million-dollar loans funneled through the company's accounts, combined with years of shady dealings, had left a trail too damning to ignore. By the time the authorities finished piecing it together, Jason's name would be synonymous with corporate fraud. He would spend the rest of his life fighting lawsuits, or worse, rotting in a cell. Susan, now tied to the failing company on paper, was drowning in debt. Her once perfect life, meticulously built on lies and manipulation, had crumbled. The money she thought she would inherit from the business was gone. The house sold, and her reputation shattered. She had no choice but to move in with Jason, the man she had betrayed me for, a poetic twist of fate. Their relationship, built on deceit, was now strained under the weight of their shared downfall. Sarah, meanwhile, was reeling from the public humiliation. The video of her with Dominic had spread like wildfire. The whispers and judgment from family and friends were relentless. Her engagement to Mike was over, her dreams of a fairy tale wedding reduced to ashes. She moved in with Susan and Jason, the three of them bound together in a web of mutual destruction. Weeks turned into months, and their lives continued to spiral. Jason's once lavish home was foreclosed, forcing them into a small, run-down apartment in a part of the city they once scoffed at. Susan, who had always prided herself on appearances, now found herself working at a low-end diner to make ends meet. Sarah, who had been used to a life of privilege, took a job at a retail store, her bright future dimmed by the scandal that followed her everywhere. The bitterness between them grew with each passing day. Arguments erupted over finances, over blame, over the life they once had but could never reclaim. Jason turned to alcohol, drowning his sorrows in cheap whiskey, while Susan grew more resentful, her regret festering like an open wound. Sarah, once the golden child, was now just another reminder of their collective failure. As for me, my life had taken a different turn entirely. The Maldives became my sanctuary, a place to heal and rediscover myself. The $80 million in my secure account afforded me a lifestyle of comfort and freedom. I invested in small ventures, traveled the world, and allowed myself the luxury of living on my terms for the first time in decades. I rarely thought of the people I left behind. When I did, it was only with a sense of closure. They had taken everything from me, my trust, my family, my dignity. But in the end, they had only destroyed themselves. Justice, in its own twisted way, had been served. One evening, as I sat on the balcony of my villa overlooking the ocean, my phone buzzed with a message from Butch. Thought you'd like to know Jason filed for bankruptcy. Susan's working at a diner. Sarah's trying to get out of town. They're done, mate. I stared at the message for a moment before setting the phone aside. There was no satisfaction left to be had, no lingering need for revenge. I had one, and that was enough. The waves crashed softly against the shore, the stars beginning to dot the night sky. I raised my glass of whiskey in a silent toast, to freedom, to resilience, to a life reclaimed. And with that, I let the past fade into the darkness, ready to embrace whatever came next. Months turned into years, and my life in the Maldives flourished. The tranquility of the islands allowed me to reflect without bitterness. I had built a new life, one free of the lies and betrayal that once suffocated me. The $80 million had been more than enough to start anew, but it wasn't just about the money. It was about the freedom to live without the weight of my past. I immersed myself in ventures that brought me joy and purpose. I opened a boutique resort on one of the smaller islands, a haven for travelers seeking solace and escape. It became a labor of love, and I found satisfaction in creating something beautiful and welcoming. Guests came and went, often remarking on the peacefulness of the place, unaware that its foundation was built on the ashes of my former life. Meanwhile, back home, the fallout continued to haunt Susan, Jason, and Sarah. Jason was sentenced to 6 years in prison for corporate fraud after a lengthy trial. The evidence was overwhelming. Years of financial mismanagement and fraudulent transactions had finally caught up with him. The courtroom was packed the day the verdict was read, and Jason's once arrogant demeanor was replaced with one of defeat. His charm and connections couldn't save him this time. Susan was left alone to pick up the pieces. The debts tied to her name were insurmountable, and the house I had sold left her with nothing. The once pristine image she had cultivated over decades was in ruins. Working at the diner became her reality. Her once perfect world reduced to serving coffee to people who barely noticed her. She avoided the whispers and stares of former friends, who now saw her as a cautionary tale. Sarah, disillusioned and humiliated, tried to escape the shadow of the scandal. She moved to a small town far from the city, attempting to rebuild her life. But the internet never forgets, and whispers of her past followed her wherever she went. Her dreams of a fairy tale life were long gone, replaced with the harsh reality of her actions. One day, while I was walking along the beach, my phone buzzed with a message from Peter. He was enjoying his own freedom, having severed ties with the chaos of his former life. The message was short but poignant. "They'll never recover. Hope you're thriving, Ethan." I smiled, typing a simple reply, "I am. Thanks for everything." As time passed, I rarely thought about the life I had left behind. My days were filled with laughter, new friendships, and the serenity of the ocean. I had started writing, chronicling the story of my life, not as a tale of vengeance, but as a reminder of resilience and the power of reclaiming one's narrative. One evening, as I sat on the deck of my villa, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I raised a glass to myself. I wasn't the same man who had walked into that church years ago, shattered by betrayal. I had rebuilt myself piece by piece and emerged stronger. Life had given me a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. Years passed, and my life on the islands became a testament to rebirth. The resort flourished, its reputation spreading as a secluded paradise. It wasn't just a business, it was my sanctuary. Guests often asked about the man behind the vision, and I'd offer vague stories about a life left behind. They didn't need to know the details. All that mattered was the peace this place offered. One quiet evening, as I sat on the veranda overlooking the moonlit ocean, I received an unexpected email. It was from an address I didn't recognize, but the subject line stopped me cold. "You won." Curiosity piqued. I opened it. The email was brief, but its words carried a weight that pulled me into the past. "Ethan, I know you don't want to hear from me, and I don't blame you, but I had to reach out. You were right about everything. I see that now, though it's far too late. Jason is still in prison. Sarah barely speaks to me. I'm working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, and every day feels heavier than the last. I replay everything in my mind, wondering where it all went wrong. I thought I had control, thought I was smarter than you. I see now how wrong I was. You didn't just win, you showed me the truth about myself, and it's unbearable. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect a reply. I just wanted you to know that I see it now, the destruction I caused and the life I threw away. I hope you've found peace, Ethan." Susan and I stared at the screen for a long time, the ocean breeze tugging gently at the edges of my world. Susan's words stirred something in me, but it wasn't anger. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was a profound sense of finality. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Months later, I received another unexpected message, this time from Sarah. It was a handwritten letter, forwarded through Peter, who had remained a quiet presence in my life. The letter was raw, filled with regret and confusion. "Dad, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I hope you do. I've spent the last few years trying to make sense of everything. I was young and stupid, caught up in a world I didn't understand. I blamed you for things that weren't your fault and trusted people I shouldn't have. I'm sorry for everything. I know I don't deserve to call you Dad anymore, but you were. You were always there for me, even when I didn't appreciate it. I don't know where you are now, but I hope you're happy. I hope you've found the peace you deserve. Love, Sarah." This time, I felt a pang of something I hadn't allowed myself in years: vulnerability. Sarah's words were heavy with genuine remorse, and for the first time, I considered what forgiveness might feel like. But forgiveness didn't mean reopening old wounds. It meant letting go for both of us. I penned a short reply, Sarah. Thank you for your letter. It means more than you know. I hope you find your own peace, as I have. Life has a way of teaching us what matters most, even through pain. Take care of yourself. Ethan, as I slipped the letter into the outgoing mail, I felt lighter. The past no longer defined me, nor did the people who had once shaped it. I had found freedom, not just in distance or wealth, but in understanding that moving forward was the ultimate victory. One morning, years after leaving it all behind, I walked along the shoreline, the sun rising in brilliant hues of gold. The waves lapped at my feet, and the air carried a sense of renewal. I paused, watching the horizon, and smiled. The life I had once known was a distant memory, but the person I had become was rooted in the lessons of that journey. There was no bitterness, no regret, only gratitude for the strength I had discovered along the way. The world stretched wide and endless before me, and I knew, in that moment, that I was truly free. Betrayal exposed, justice served. What would you have done in Ethan's place? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping stories.